Okay, hello and welcome to the Modern Software Engineering channel. We're going to answer one big question, and before we get into that, just give us a like and a subscribe for the channel so you can get more of this and such big questions as the one we're going to answer today, which is me and Dave are going to explore how do we get agile thinking back on track. So I'm going to throw this one over to Dave to start with. It's like, well, what do we mean if we're saying, how do we get it back on track? What do we mean by off track?
So I think every Agile signatory of the original manifesto that I've ever met or spoken to online kind of doesn't think it turned out in the way in which they hoped it would. And I think that's one take on it. But also I think it's a very common view that Agile's a bad thing and that it's bureaucratic and heavyweight and overburdening to software development. And that's the antithesis of what the people that came up with the terminology around Agile thinking and were involved in the original version of the Agile Manifesto were thinking about. You know, it was all about literally being agile. It was Craig Dave Thomas says it's about agile is about being agility. So can you change quickly? Is it easy for you to change direction, change your mind of reasoning and thinking? And I think the regret is that that's not where we ended up. And historically, that's probably for a variety of reasons. So one of those reasons is that inevitably, as human beings, when we come across a new idea, we're going to frame that within our own frame of reference. And so if we're from a waterfall thinking background, when we look at Agile, we're going to try and divide that up into a series of discrete steps and try and separate those things. So the requirements process is you're going to try and map stories onto the requirements process, and you're going to say, okay, so we've got to get all of the stories right first, and then we'll hand those over to some other group of people. And all of those things are kind of wrong. They're different to what was in mind of the people that really practiced Agile and were trying to promote it originally. So I think there's a variety of reasons why we might think that it's off track. The last thing that I'd mention is that for old school extreme programmers like me, which is where I started on my Agile journey, I suppose, I was doing some things that you'd consider Agile before then, but the first exposure to Agile thinking and the terminology was extreme programming by Kent Beck. And to people like me, it was an engineering discipline. We were talking about continuous integration, test-driven development, pair programming, those sorts of practice, and a whole bunch of other practices that mattered and worked in combination with one another to produce better results. And this was a way of organizing our work differently to how most software development was done to that point, but that worked better. And then it got changed. Scrum came along and kind of added some more project management thinking about ways of organizing things. And I think originally it was consciously that. It was kind of the PM aspect of Agile thinking as applied to the engineering disciplines of extreme programming. And then what happened is somehow we dropped the extreme programming disciplines and kept the project management stuff and then beefed them up until they were not really very agile anymore.
Yeah, I think that as you said, there's a number of causes. And I think exactly that idea of seeing something new, seeing a new proposition through old lenses is something that inevitably as humans we're going to do. But it is trying to catch people. I mean, having done a lot of training work over the years, that has always been the thing, whether I've been talking about development techniques or whether I've been talking about programming languages. And, having somebody come to a new programming language or paradigm, they inevitably look at it through their old language and paradigm. And they kind of say, is this like this? And you're kind of going, well, yes and no, in the sense that I can see the connection, but also actually that might not be the starting point.
Just as an aside on that, I once saw somebody who was learning C and had coming to it from BASIC, who generated a bunch of macros in C to allow them to program in BASIC. Essentially.
That's. I saw a very similar thing at one company I worked at where they did the same thing for Fortran. So make it look like Fortran. But that's a very common thing, and it also relates to a question, where I did have people say, "Oh, well, I know C. How long will it take me to become an OO programmer in C++?" And I says, "It depends how you're using your C. Show me your C, and I will tell you whether it's going to be a short trip because your mindset's already in the right place, or a long one." And we see that again with agility, is that a number of people, if they have followed a project management methodology that is explicit and certified and all the rest of it, then they are looking to agility for the same thing, but that's not what it was there for. It doesn't have those, it doesn't have that landscape, it doesn't have those features. So you look hard for those features and you emphasize those. And I think that issue is very common. And again, carrying over your habits from one set of practices to another, more than once, but I have a very particular experience in mind. I visited a company where they had described that a previous attempt to kind of become agile had failed because they were exhausted. What it turned out they'd done is they'd taken all of their classic project management techniques and just done them more. In other words, at a higher frequency. So instead of things that taking weeks and months, they were now doing the same kind of things in hours or days. And it was exhausting because they were just applying the same weight and mass of techniques rather than reducing and streamlining. And I think that is the issue, that, as you said, a lot of people have this perception, this ironic perception of, oh, agile development, that's very bureaucratic. It's got all these rituals. And it's just like, but it's not. The very name was actually was quite appropriate. Agile, to move quickly and easily. Therefore, and if you imagine an athlete who is agile, you're not imagining somebody who's bulked up and slow. You're imagining somebody who's quite flexible. Think more gymnast than weightlifter. You've got the idea. And so the idea, for me, one of the characteristics is that's been driven from all of these sides, is that it has become identified with certain practices which people have proposed. And every single practice that anybody's ever proposed is normally there for a good reason. But these have become the cornerstones rather than, oh, here, try this. And I always look at it as agile development is situational. What are you doing in your context? What are your problems? What is it you need to solve? And if you have a high level of bureaucracy, how do we strip that back? If you are driven by SharePoint, Word documents and various bits and pieces and 1,000 sign-offs, then passing index cards around, passing things around nice and simply, but being in the same room and present and using these as tokens of conversation is how to get the flow, moving things around. It's not the pieces of paper, it's the conversation they enable. It's the getting the people in the room. Whereas I visited one company who, when I taught them, the whole idea was, when Kent talked about user stories, I actually sat at a conference with him years ago. We were at the back, and Eva Jacobson, Mr. Use Cases, was there giving a talk. And Ken leaned over to me and said, "Oh, well, I kind of took that from Eva, but kind of like followed it through. It's just like, no, it's just this." But people started making rituals. We saw it in the 90s and 2000s, people making huge ritualistic bureaucracy.
Turn it back into use cases that covered every angle.
Absolutely. And and that was, that cycle recurred to the point that one company proudly showed me, where we did a whole load of stuff with cards. And I said, the cards are not the be all and end all, but the idea is that that's enabling us to talk about some stuff. And it's allowing us to capture the essence rather than getting lost in the bureaucracy and thinking, our job here, let's say you're dealing with BAs, our job here is to produce documents. It's like, no. It's to try and discover what we want to build and what's important. And they came back, when I visited them again, they proudly showed me these Word documents. They said, we took your advice. And I'm looking at these Word documents, which have got all the classic up front. Here's all the version history embedded in the document, and it's a very template driven kind of thing, and it's pages and pages long. And I said, I'm pretty sure that this is not quite what I recommended. So, oh yes, that card thing, and there it was on, I don't know, page 7 or 8. In the middle was that, and the rest of the document was just an explanation of that and panning it out of the traditional this was just this. It wasn't even payload. It was an afterthought, and it's just like the level of misunderstanding that there was there. This company also, I remember when I started off the workshop, there was a person there from, for want of a better term, the process police. and I'm doing introductions.
Yeah.
And what are you here? She said, I want to find out what we're going to do, and then I'm going to write it down. That's going to become our process. And I said, I don't know what you're going to do. I'm here to offer you a bunch of suggestions, and situationally you apply them. And maybe your problem is bureaucracy. I would say it was. And that's what you want to address. Maybe you've got a number of other problems. And all of these techniques, all of these rituals, they were not the point. They were enablers. And when somebody comes up with a new technique, it's just like, oh, maybe this will work. Whereas people have taken that as being the totality and the goal of agile development, rather than, oh, we're problem solving. I wonder if this tool will work. Oh, it doesn't work in our situation. Daily stand-ups, let's try it.
Yeah.
And, in some places, absolutely gets a style of communication going. In other places, it just becomes another report meeting, and therefore it fails. Right. If it fails, and the agile way of dealing with this, if it's not working for you, you try something else.
Yes.
That's the bit that people have. That's the tool they haven't taken on.
I think that's important, and probably gets us onto the route to thinking about how to get the thinking back on track. Because that idea, fundamentally, it seems to me that what at its core, I'm a science nerd. I see the world through science-shaped glasses. That's the way that I interpret things. So what I see Agile as is kind of a practical, pragmatic, rule of thumb kind of style scientific method. Try something out, try and identify what works, and importantly, what doesn't work, and stop doing stuff that doesn't work and think of new things to do instead. And fundamentally, that is how science works. That's how we solve really hard problems. And so that ability to adapt, to be agile, to change your mind is absolutely fundamental. The other thing that seems important to me that we were referring to earlier is that any team that gets skilled, sophisticated at the practice of agile development, in my experience, sees and learns lessons from lean thinking for the same reasons, because I think lean thinking is kind of the application of the scientific method to building products and stuff. But part of the lean philosophy is to take work out. So always trying to optimize things to reduce the amount of work. What we want when we're being agile is to focus on doing the minimum amount of work that we need to do for the maximum impact, the maximum outcome. And so we're trying to find ways of working more cleverly, more efficiently all of the time. So if your stand-ups aren't working, or if your backlog grooming is being some kind of, big ceremony with robes and stuff, then stop. Don't do it. Change it to be something lighter. Change it to have those simple conversations between people. We want to move from agile being Jira stand-ups and retrospectives to being, let's try this out and see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, is to understand these tools and techniques as what they are. They were tools and techniques for, hey, try this. Normally people, there's a kind of there's a lack of ideas sometimes. Sometimes we find ourselves stuck, and what you want is for somebody to say, we tried this and it worked. That doesn't mean it's going to work for you, but now you're going to get some evidence. And I think it's interesting because we do have that. What's missing from, I think, a lot of organizations and their approaches to development, and therefore adoption or any development approach, is a lack of curiosity. In other words, that they are not trying to change curiously enough. They want change without change.
Yes.
And they are missing. So, the scorched earth that is now Scrum. I used to very strongly advocate Scrum because there wasn't much ambiguity, because most people hadn't heard of it. Because I said, this is a light touch. It's and if I were to say that to some people now, they would go like, light touch, that's all it is. It's just like, no, it is. There really is no process there. You can't certify in it because there's nothing there to certify. We should probably have another video on certification. But,
I'm sure we will.
but we'd have a good old rant for about half an hour, I think. But the point there is, it was originally introduced as an empirical process control model. That was its framing. It's like, we're going to try stuff. And if it works out, we want to know why it works out, and therefore to do more of it. Was it a coincidence, or is there something deep and meaningful here? If it doesn't work out, well, also why? Yeah. And let's find out and attribute correctly and respond correctly. And that idea of an iterative approach is at the heart of any kind of system of discovery and improvement. Of just like, okay, let's try that one again, but change this. Let's try this, and that's your. And there again, we see the science and engineering thinking, that deliberation, that kind of second order thinking, stepping back from it, going,
Yes.
I wonder why. Let's see what we can do here. And if somebody says, if you start saying we have certain issues on our team, we're not really making the most of what we thought we learned on the previous sprints, then you go like, okay, well, let's have how often do you reflect on your approach? And so that gets us to retrospectives, not being an empty ritual, but actually a kind of a moment to pause and go, okay, why is that not working? What is the solution? Or do we have a candidate set of solutions to this approach? All of these techniques were there for a reason. Daily stand-ups weren't there to have more control. They were just simply, let's just gather just to find out what everybody's doing, because it's
that's another one of those too.
Yeah, so you got a team to fall into the pattern of we're all working heads down, focused, and unaware of what other people are doing, that we might be colliding with them, or that they may be able to help us, or that there's something we should do together because actually we have the same objective. It was simply, I sometimes talk about the idea of team awareness. We have self-awareness, but are you aware of the bigger picture? So it was not, you must do this. It's, what are the techniques? Here is one I could suggest if you're not already doing it. And each one of these is an experiment, an ongoing experiment to adopt and adapt and to discard when it's no longer useful. But to, and so therefore there's this rolling wave of ideas where people said, this fixed set of practices is the totality of what we mean by agile. And that there's nothing agile in that at all. There is no agility, flexibility, lightweightness, or anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So fundamentally, the roots of what we're talking about are optimizing for fast feedback, learning quickly, and I suppose certainly the way that I would frame it from a continuous delivery point perspective is to try and organize our thinking into a series of experiments. We want to try something out and see if it works or not. So we want to be able to get the results back, which brings in things like automated testing, continuous integration, all of those other techniques that are so foundational to my mind to allow us this freedom to adapt.
Yeah, we don't want to end up with, I know there was a friend of mine years ago who described, he said, I went for an interview at a company that they said they were agile, but all I could see was they were fixing bugs faster. And I thought this was kind of interesting, because the whole idea, the more empirical approach is not how do we get better at fixing bugs? How do we get better at not having them? How do we get better at not having outages? How do we get better at reducing this? The demand for this failure related practice. And ultimately, I think a lot of it comes down to, again, the distraction, and as well as the subtlety, the things that people identify with. And I think that there's that idea of who's this for? It is ultimately for organizations, teams, individuals. And there's that kind of wording, this idea of like, individuals and interactions. Well, look at who is doing it and how they're doing it, and who is talking to whom and who is not talking to whom. And how are you communicating? Is that useful communication? Is it bureaucratic? Is it slow? Is it delayed? All of these things. And we've ended up with an irony that we've ended up overemphasizing the processes and tools. We've ended up with, when you ask somebody, what development approach are you using? And they will they will give you this shopping list of processes and tools. They'll talk about, we're doing this certification and that, and we're using Jira this and with this, that, and they will describe all of the mechanics in one sense, but without any of the intention. But for me, it's just like, but how about the people? That's where it starts. And you want to just make that a bit easier. We've got a little bit obsessed with the things, I guess, that are obvious. Individuals are
truly the opposite of the Agile Manifesto.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we have now. We have people focusing on processes and tools. Individuals and interactions seems, that's a bit hard and a bit subtle and a bit soft. It's like, no, actually, it's hard for all the right reasons. It's like, this is the bit that you're kind of looking at, that people kind of like, we're doing useful work, and it's improving rather than making our lives worse.
So maybe one way in which we could summarize our answer, because I think we're getting to that kind of time in the video, is that use engineering practices to help you to achieve the Agile principles as laid out in the Agile Manifesto.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's a curious thing there is that sometimes whenever I'm talking about Agile, I will often pull up the manifesto for Agile software development, not because it's the be all and end all. It's a quarter of a century old.
Yeah.
17 middle-aged white guys, the world has more to say on this than that. But at the same time, it's concise and still a million miles away from what many people are doing. It's actually it has a very simple proposition. But simple is not necessarily easy, but it is a series of principles. It's not a how-to, but it is a case of are you valuing your individuals and interactions? Are you actually producing working software? Do you have customer collaboration? And are you responding to change? If the answer to all of these is yes, that's awesome.
You're probably doing fairly well.
Yeah. And it might not, what you're doing might not have a name. It might not have a certification, and that's absolutely fine. But have you brought the intelligence that is available within your team and your organization to bear to achieve those? And if the answer is yes, you're done. If, however, you find yourself resting on the right-hand side with an emphasis that all your conversations are around processes and tools, it's around various forms of documentation, or more importantly, bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Whether it is about arse covering style contract negotiation, and whether the plan or other related artifacts have become static and central to your way of working, then you know that there's something wrong. No matter what you call it, it's not the right thing. So there's, as I say, there's a simple, drawing back to the original Agile Manifesto. It's not the last word, but it's not a bad starting point, and most people don't even get that far.
Yeah. So that's great. So let's thank everybody for watching, and do remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. I'd also like to say thank you to all of our Patreon members, and if you're interested in supporting the channel, do consider joining. There's lots of perks to joining. So take a look at that. There's a link in the description below. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.